Section 1 of The Black Cat, Volume 5, Number 5, February 1900. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Raeann, Genevieve. The Black Cat, Volume 5, Number 5, February 1900. Section 1. The Haunted Cap by George W. Kelley. Valor had earned for Colonel Pearson his rank in the Confederate service. His left cheek was marked by a star-like depression where a bullet had entered at Chancellorsville, and his right was seamed by a long gash left by a saber at Aldie. 4 years after the war, one April evening, he was entertaining a guest at his residence on the left bank of the James, not many miles from Richmond. The chill air from the valley drove them from the veranda into the library, where the visitor eagerly listened to the colonel's reminiscences of Stonewall Jackson. "Speaking of Jackson," said the colonel, "reminds me of this Union cap. It has a strange history." As he spoke, he took from a shelf where it rested among numerous other relics of the war a dark blue cap with leather visor, such as was worn by privates in the Federal Army. It was faded and stained, and the right half of the visor was broken and bent down. Through the middle of the band, on the left side, was a round hole, a trifle larger than a dime. There was no lining, but in the center of the crown on the inside was a round, black wooden button. "By hundreds of soldiers in Georgia and North Carolina," said the colonel. "This is known as the Haunted Cap. It was worn by a soldier in the 119th New York Volunteers, and was taken from his body at Chancellorsville by James Ashby of the 44th Georgia." His guest having expressed a desire to hear the story, Colonel Pearson continued. "Ashby was among the first to enter the service of his state. He was not a planter, nor the son of a planter, neither wealthy nor the heir to wealth. He had nothing to do with bringing about secession, perhaps opposed it, but the moment the war began, he was in the ranks. In many respects he was a rare type. In camp, on the march, or under fire, he was equally happy and cheerful, and gave cheer to others. No mishap was a disaster, no wound serious, never questioned nor complained. In action there was not a more reliable man in the army. Always cool and steadfast, he would stand until ordered to retire, and he shot to hurt. He never fought behind cover if he could better see his mark in the open. When wounded, he disagreed with the surgeons as to the time he ought to stay under their care. At Malvern Hill, a bullet cut a furrow across the crown of his head, yet he was in Second Bull Run, and was there wounded in the arm. He was in line again at Sharpsburg, or Antietam as your people call it, and later shared in our victory at Fredericksburg. On May 2, '63, he was in the flanking columns of Jackson at Chancellorsville. You know about that battle, how Howard, with his right unprotected, was surprised, and most of the 11th Corps driven from their works and the field. Here and there a few men in the retreating line would make a stand for a moment and endeavor to rally. Ashby noticed a Federal soldier as cool as he, taking slow aim, and he realized that he was the intended victim of the Minet ball soon to fly. It came piercing his hat. Now it was his turn, and the Federal soldier fell. As Ashby went by in the advance, he took his cap from the man he had shot. The bullet had entered the forehead through the cap band. This clean hole has since been made by wearing the broken edges of the rent. When killed, the soldier had his cap turned quarter-way round, with the visor over the right ear, which accounts for the perforation being on the left side. It was not uncommon for the soldiers of both sides to retain some trophy taken from the enemy. And so the cap which Ashby showed his comrades aroused no comment until one day he strolled down the company street wearing it, and walking with a sort of mock military swagger. That night he was the talk of the camp, and was spoken of in a changed way. While some treated the performance lightly, saying that Ashby was joking, others could discern no element of fun. No one would say he was mentally affected, but if not, what could be his purpose? For kind, brave, lovable Ashby to do such a thing seemed more than strange. The next day, though, Ashby did not wear the cap. He showed it to many, calling attention to the rent in the band, and relating how it was made. Indeed, he neglected no opportunity to do this until men dreaded to meet him and give him occasion for exhibiting his trophy and telling its grim story. Another night Ashby was the talk of the camp, and an element of dread entered into the discussion. Fear for Ashby, or of something indefinable. If not out of his mind, something evil possessed him, an evil notion, if nothing worse. Darkness will give a direction to thoughts which in daylight would take some other course. And in the shades made by the campfires, some of the soldiers wandered mentally into strange realms. The opinion became general that the spirit of the dead Union soldier was plaguing Ashby. Others, more profound, reasoned that there had developed in the Georgian the instinct which prompts the savage to take and keep the scalp of his victims as a token of his prowess. Though no one had yet spoken to Ashby on the subject, he had overheard remarks which told him of the sensation he had made. The next day he again strolled through the camp wearing the cap. He had made the bullet hole round, thus enlarging it, and turned the cap to the right so that the hole came in the center of his forehead, and the white skin could be seen shining through. Staring eyes and frowns met him at every turn. He stopped when he heard from one man holding the attention of a knot of others the remark, "Ashby has gone too far with this foolishness. If he won't stop it, we'll take the cap away from him." Ashby touched the arm of the speaker and said, "Bill, you mustn't get mad and have a tantrum. I'm not harming anyone." "Yes, you are, Jim. That's just what's the matter. You're harming yourself. The boys don't like what you're doing, and that feeling will grow till they don't like you." "Now, boys, let's be reasonable," said Ashby. "Sit down and we'll talk this over." With a feeling of relief that the disagreeable matter seemed about to be settled, the dozen men sat down, and in a moment another dozen gathered. And the news flying that Ashby was being called to account, others came, until half the regiment was assembled. Ashby remained standing. When the eager crowd looked ready, he raised his hand, but before he could utter a word, Bill interrupted, saying, "Now, Jim, I don't like to break in on you, but you must take that cap off while you talk. You know we don't want to see it anyway, and it's kind of crowding things to keep it on while you're talking about it. All we can see is that round white spot on your forehead. For God's sakes, Jim, take it off. Take it off. Throw it away. Take it off," came from all directions. Ashby faced the throng with his old-time, gay and happy look, and he was happy, for the time he had been waiting for had come. He listened with a smile to Bill's pleadings, but when the demands for the removal of the cap were made in angry tones, he threw back his shoulders and looked defiant. Then he bowed and smiled and dropped the cap at his feet. "Now, Jim Ashby," said Bill, "I want to say one word more for the boys. We've never had any difference with you before. We couldn't. You're the only man in this regiment that every other man likes. But we can't bear this cap business. Some right ugly notion has got into your head, and no good can come of it. Surely no good is got foolin' with a dead man's things. I'm not afraid of much of anything myself, but my flesh creeps every time I think of that cap. You shot the man that wore it in a fair fight. That's all right. But it can't be right to go parading around in the cap of a man you killed. It don't show respect for him. I wish you would let us have it, Jim, and we'll bury it with all the honors and fire a salute. That's all I've got to say." This speech was received with hearty applause, and then all turned to Ashby. "Boys," said he, "Bill has just said what I thought he would, and I judge from your applause that you think as he does. Now the trouble is, you're all superstitious. I'm not. You're afraid that after a man is dead, he may come back to plague you. I've known you to charge up to a battery and face canister by the bucketful, and after dark have been afraid to go over that same ground because there were dead men there. When those men were firing cannon at you by daylight, you didn't fear them or their guns, but after they were dead and the sun gone down, you shook all over. But I don't believe a man dies at all. He gets through here, and we call it death. I believe he's left these parts, but you have a fear that the soul still has a hold on folks on earth. That cap is nothing to me, only so much cloth with a hole through it. To you it's more. You seem to feel that the man who used to wear it owns it now. Now, boys, don't be childish. I won't wear the cap if it troubles anybody. I allow I only put it on today to stir you up and get a chance to say what I have." A dismal silence followed. Ashby looked over the crowd and at the cap, which he was turning in his hands. Then he held up the relic as if to throw it to his comrades for their disposal. Instead, he placed it under his arm, saying with a smile, "No more now, boys. We'll call this gathering adjourned," and walked away. Excitement of a feverish sort spread through the camp. A few days later, when a story was started that Ashby was wearing the cap at all times in his tent, and that some strange power possessed it. 4 men say they had seen him put the cap on his head, visor to the front, and that in 3 minutes it had turned quarter way round, bringing the visor over the right ear and the bullet hole in the middle of the forehead. This story confirmed the fears of all who had wished Ashby to give up the gruesome relic, while those who, like himself, professed no belief in supernatural influences, declared, of course, that he was working a joke. While the sincerity of the 4 men who had seen the cap turn on Jim's head was unquestioned, many made inquiries directly of him. To all he answered that the cap did revolve as stated, and furthermore, that it had done so a good many times. To doubters he expressed a willingness for investigation, and suggested that the next day at noon he would meet all who desired to be there in the company street, and would then put the cap on, and let others do so if they wished, and all could examine it. 500 men were gathered when Ashby appeared next day. He wore his Confederate hat, but held so all could see it, the now famous haunted cap. He mounted a box and looked slowly over his audience. Excepting a dozen or so in front, every man looked as if a death lottery were to be drawn, and he feared his name would be announced. No one moved, and all were silent, with fear and awe written on their faces. In contrast was Ashby's happy smile, and the dozen men at his feet were smiling also. To them this was an entertainment, a diversion from the monotony of life in camp, while to the others it seemed reckless, toying with a dread mystery, a bold defiance of powers unknown. Ashby raised the cap to the level of his shoulder, saying, "Boys, you have all heard of the strange freaks of this Yankee cap. I want you to see for yourselves. When I put it on, it turns around to just the place it was when the poor fellow who wore it got killed. Perhaps some of you would like to look it over," and he tossed it into the crowd. A screeching shell would not have created so much commotion. No one took his eyes off the quick-sailing cap, and there was a stampede in the line of its flight. With all the dodging, the cap struck a man full in the breast. He leaped away with an oath, and all drew near aside, leaving the cap on the ground in the midst of a wide circle of frightened soldiers. Ashby laughed aloud. One of the skeptics made his way through the crowd, picked up the cap, and returned with it to the little group around the speaker. Each in turn and collectively then examined it with much care and deliberation. In a half-disappointed way, they offered it to those outside, who shook their heads, and it was then passed back to Ashby, who watched the proceedings with an air of indifference. Ashby gave the cap a vigorous shake and then slowly put it on his head, using both hands, holding the visor in his left, while he smoothed down his hair with the right, drawing the latter out as the cap settled down. The broken half of the visor hung down over his right eye, giving him an uncanny, one-eyed look. "Now watch," he exclaimed, putting his hands behind him. They did watch, and many of them wished for months after that they had not. No one could perceive any motion either of Ashby or of the cap, but at the end of a minute it was clearly perceptible to all that the cap had moved toward the right at least an inch. In less than another minute, Ashby's right eye coming into view, and the bullet hole beginning to transit the white skin of his forehead sent a chill through the blood of the watchers. Every man was breathless. Had a shriek or scream or any sudden utterance of alarm been made, or even a strong gust of wind swept by, they would have fallen in fright or rushed away in panic. The cap still moved. No one saw the motion any more than one sitting across the room could see the steady move of the minute hand of a clock. Yet in 3 minutes the visor of the cap was over Ashby's right ear, and the bullet hole in the center of his forehead, and there it stopped. Ashby removed the cap, saying, "Boys, shall we try it again?" The moving away of the spectators gave him a negative answer. Those veterans of many battles were afraid. As he jumped to the ground, one of the men standing near asked to look at the cap again. Ashby at once handed it out, and the soldiers who had carefully examined it before scrutinized it critically. It was evident from their speech and manner that they did not detect any sign of human agency in the cap's movement. When they handed it back, Ashby remarked, "The boys are worrying about something they can't account for. Why should a full-grown man be afraid of a thing because it's strange, or has some merely guessed-at connection with some other existence?" "That's all right, Jim," said the sergeant of his company. "We men right here are no more afraid of that cap than you are. I'd be willing to wear it every day and let it whirl, but the boys are different. They are afraid it bring you harm, and they can't spare you right now. So why not put the thing out of sight and stop worrying?" "Oh, I'm not going to plague them any more," replied Ashby, putting the cap under his coat. "Perhaps they'll never see this cap again." Soon camp was broken, and Lee's army took up its march toward Pennsylvania, and the cap was only a memory among Ashby's comrades. Its story spread, however, and in distant camps the haunted cap afforded food for thought and tale. As the surface of a pond becomes smooth again where a stone has fallen, while around and beyond extend widening rings of disturbance, so the career of the cap seemed to end in the camp of its origin, while the legends connected with it grew and expanded in regions more remote. As told by the soldiers 50 miles away, the ghostly form of a Federal private was seen standing on a box with Ashby, while a spirit hand was plainly observed turning the cap on his head. A little after noon on the 1st of July, part of Ewell's corps entered on the plain north of the village of Gettysburg, and was at once engaged with the 11th Corps of the Army of the Potomac. On the ridge to the right had been close, desperate fighting since early morn. There, on the plain, the Union line now gave way, for it could not withstand the new enemy from the north, and a little later the approach of Gordon from the east. The Federal troops did not yield a step, however, without a struggle, and the combat was sharp and constant. Ashby was in his place, and his cool, deliberate fire indicated that he was increasing the casualties of the enemy. Just as the entire Union line was forced back to the houses and streets of Gettysburg, he took from under his coat the haunted cap and put it on, the visor over his right ear and the bullet hole in the middle of his forehead. The men about him were aghast. It was no time or place for entreaty or objection, and without speech they shrunk away and left him fighting alone. But he did not appear to miss the strengthening touch of comrades. His rifle spoke as frequently as before, and he did not lag in advance. As the soldiers in blue surged through the village streets to reach the safety of the hills beyond, their retreat covered by a few regiments holding the outer buildings and checking our rapid advance, Ashby, still somewhat apart from his fellows, staggered a little, and then fell on his face. All the men near were at once about him. He was dead, shot in the forehead, and the bullet had gone through the hole in the cap band. He had made the supreme test and had failed. He had not conquered or dispelled the superstition of his comrades. Their fears had been realized. The evil they dreaded had befallen. When Ashby was buried, his fellow soldiers nearly came to blows over the grave. No one wished the cap buried with him, but some wanted it buried by itself and buried deep. Only one, a man who had not shared the prevailing fear at the exhibition in camp, wished to save it, and after much persuasion was allowed to take it, making solemn promise that no one should see it or be troubled with it in any way. While on our retreat to the Potomac, I learned of an officer of Ashby's regiment of the haunted cap. I sought out the soldier who had it and became its possessor, together with its story, as you have heard it. It was not till long afterward, when arranging this collection of relics, that I gave the matter another serious thought. Then one evening, sitting here in the firelight, I mentally reviewed the strange tale of the haunted cap, watching it as it hung on that nail, almost expecting to see it turn as it had done on Ashby's head. That there was a mystery connected with it I felt sure, and I resolved to solve it if possible. I accordingly wrote to friends and army associates in Georgia, letters of the same tenure inquiring into the antecedents of Ashby, and to officers of the 119th New York, with a view of establishing, if possible, the identity of the private shot by Ashby at Chancellorsville, but making no allusion in either set to the cap legend. In due time I received numerous letters from different parts of Georgia, where my inquiries had been transmitted, but only 2 or 3 from persons who knew Ashby. All the others gave marvelous versions of the haunted cap, but no 2 alike. One said, "Jeems Ashby wore the cap like what we used on the guns, only larger, and one day it exploded and blew him into 1,000,000 pieces." And another averred, "He stole a cap and it spun round on his head like a top till he got dizzy and died. That's the truth. There were spirits in it." But one letter gave me all the facts I could ask for: the birthplace of Ashby, his parentage, where he attended school, his apprenticeship to a working jeweler in Atlanta, and that he was considered one of the most skillful in that line when he enlisted. This information came the very day I made a discovery. I was examining the cap inch by inch, holding it by this wooden button on the inside, when the button seemed to part or move between my thumb and finger. But when I let go of it, it looked as solid as before. I could see no mark or break indicating a separation, and after running the point of my knife over every part, I was about to lay it aside when it occurred to me to twist the top. I held it firmly by the bottom edge, and then twisted my thumb and finger over the top part, first to the left, as if to unscrew it, and then, as it did not yield, to the right. The top part came suddenly off, but my finger slipping, flew back with a little snap. I did it again, with more care, as I do now, and you see the button is in 2 pieces connected by a fine wire spring, which, fully drawn, allows the top to be removed an inch. Furthermore, the spring is so adjusted that when the top closes against the bottom, it turns to the left into a socket from which it cannot be removed except by a turn to the right. Observe, too, that one side of the top is thinner than the other, and that the spring is fastened nearer that edge than the center. I spent the rest of the day experimenting. I made this band to pass over my head and fasten to this other around my neck. On the top of the band is a button, which is gashed on the underside. Putting the cap on with my left hand, with the right, while making the motion of smoothing down my hair, I disengage the spring button and insert the thin lower edge of its top into the gash of the button on the band. The slightest movement of eyebrows or scalp causes the spring to turn the cap until the visor is over my right ear and the bullet hole in the center of the forehead. The colonel placed the cap upon his head as he spoke, and went through the motions described while his guests watched with interest the working of the ingenious contrivance. "That seemed a long 3 minutes," he continued as he finished the demonstration, "but it required hours of practice to get the results you have seen. It only remained for me to find out how Ashby had contrived to fasten the button to the top of his head. You will remember I told you that at Malvern Hill a bullet cut a furrow across his crown. I learned after much inquiry that the course of the bullet was marked by a slight ridge, with little bunches or hummocks. All was clear now. Ashby had so manipulated one of these bunches that he could insert the top of the button under it. When the colonel uttered the last word of this remarkable story, his northern visitor grasped his hand, saying, "Colonel Pearson, your common sense and persistence solved this seeming mystery in the simplest manner. The cap remains just what Ashby said it was, so much cloth with a hole through it." "Yes, perhaps so," replied the colonel slowly. "Perhaps so. But the fact remains that Ashby received his death through that bullet hole. A mere coincidence, perhaps. Well, perhaps. I wish you would read this letter, though, and think about it. I did not receive it till I thought I had dispelled all the mystery." The letter was from a private of the 119th New York, and was as follows: "Colonel W. A. Pearson, Dear Sir, your letter of inquiry has reached me after traveling pretty nearly over all New York State. You know the soldiers are pretty well scattered now. I can give particulars of only one comrade killed at Chancellorsville. His name was Gustav Kling, and he was next to me in the firing line, and next to him was Carl Worth. When Jackson stampeded our right, we tried to hold our line, but it was no use. Worth and I had stopped firing and had begun to retire when Gustav said, "There's a good fighting rebel, and he's got a good shot. I've been watching him. But I'm a fair shot, too." With that he took careful aim, and we watched, but the rebel he didn't fall, but at once leveled his rifle, and Gustav fell dead. I can see now just how he looked. His cap was turned round one side. He had broken the visor, and it hung down over his eyes, so we pushed it round to the right. After the battle I found his body and helped bury it. He was shot through the forehead. Now I'm going to tell you something that Carl Worth and I have talked over 100 times or more, but have never mentioned to others. When we were pushed back to the houses at Gettysburg, the lines were pretty close together, and a little ahead of Dole's brigade was a fine-looking Georgian, firing coolly and evidently picking his men. I turned to Worth and said, "There's the fellow who shot Gustav." We both raised to fire, but before we could, there was a report right between us, and the Georgian fell. And it was just like the report of the rifle Gustav carried when he was killed. It made a peculiar noise, different from ours, and we knew the sound well. It seemed to burn powder slower, and gave a sort of whistle or shriek, more like a rocket than the usual crack. And it was a most unearthly sound. It was that familiar rifle shriek that sounded in our ears at Gettysburg when the man fell. Carl and I looked at each other. He was whiter than a sheet, and I felt I was the same. We turned and ran. But then, I'm not superstitious, and there were other reasons for running. Colonel Pearson's guest stopped reading at this point, and began to think as requested by the colonel. And he is still thinking. End of section 1.
Section 2 of The Black Cat, Volume 5, Number 5, February 1900. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Black Cat, Volume 5, Number 5, February 1900. Section 2, Gamaliel's Wedge, by Margaretta M. Morley. Pardon me, did you happen to notice whether I ate my soup or not? These were the first words Gamaliel Wetmore ever addressed to me. Though strangers, fate had thrown us together at a seaside resort, and I had simply remarked that my vis-a-vis at a table was a tall, lanky, absent-minded but gentlemanly-appearing youth, when he uttered this singular question. "You see, I can distinctly remember ordering it," he confided, "but I have been sitting here so long that I cannot recollect whether I have eaten it or whether it hasn't been served yet." His eyes had a simple, trusting expression that always appeals to an older woman, and which in my case served to strengthen a fellow feeling, since I too was a sufferer from the very deliberate methods of our waitress. A laugh over our common trials made us friends, and after that he was my companion on many a long tramp and on many a sail. I found him intelligent and well-informed, the possessor of all sorts of odd and curious information, but so original and unconventional that he kept me in a constant state of wonder. Indeed, as much as I saw of him, I was never quite able to determine whether his childlike simplicity served to cover a bit of innocent mischief, or was the evidence of rare ingenuousness. I puzzled over this question a good deal until one evening, when he sat smoking a cigarette on the veranda, and a woman turned to him with an irritable complaint that tobacco made her ill. "Does it really?" he asked sympathetically. "Then I certainly advise you to give it up." I took the advice home to myself, and then and there gave up trying to analyze Gamaliel. Since the lad had so thoroughly won my liking, I was heartily pleased some years later to meet the married sister with whom he made his home. Mrs. Schofield visited at different times in Washington, and our acquaintance had ripened into real friendship, when one summer she proposed my returning with her for a visit in Osborne. We reached her home about 5 in the afternoon, and found Gamaliel engaged in cutting roses. Roses, I may add, that were later presented to me with all his old-time gallantry. He was standing in the very midst of the bed, completely surrounded by a fragrant tangle, and when he straightened up to greet us, we discovered that he was in full evening dress. "For mercy's sake!" ejaculated Emma Schofield in amazement. "What does this mean, Gamaliel? You, in evening suit, and at this time of day? You look like a valentine." In spite of his sentimental surroundings, Gamaliel looked older and more manly than I remembered him, and during dinner and later when coffee was served in the library, and Emma was listening to her husband's account of all that had transpired in her absence, I found my old friend matured in many ways without having lost any of that whimsical charm that had first attracted me. "And what has Gamaliel been doing?" asked Emma when Mr. Schofield's recital had come to an end. "Been waiting for the corner drugstore to come down Lincoln Avenue," was her husband's laughing response. "I found him standing on the curbstone only last night, patiently watching that purple light. He had forgotten that the Lincoln cars don't run by here anymore, and I think he would have been standing there yet had I not come along and picked him up." "You have not explained that evening suit yet, Gamaliel," said Emma, turning laughing eyes on her brother. "Have your other suits given out, or are they in pawn, or what is the matter?" "I have entered society in your absence." You won't stay long in it, I can tell you, if you wear that garb in the daytime." "Well, I am going to a dance this evening, and as I did not want to waste valuable time dressing after you and Mrs. Adams arrived, I got ready before you came. I do not see anything queer about that. I have thought this matter of entering society all over very carefully. It is a great bore, of course, and not at all my taste, but considering that ours is one of the oldest families here, and that I am now the only male representative of it, I regarded the step as a duty. So I got these jeans, and as an entering Wedge, called one evening on Miss Popkiss." "Miss Popkiss!" shrieked Emma, and then she and her husband burst into uncontrollable fits of laughter. "Oh dear, I wish you could appreciate how comical this is, Mrs. Adams," she finally managed to say to me, as she wiped her streaming eyes. "The idea, of a Wetmore using a Popkiss as an entering Wedge to society." Here she went off into another peal of merriment, and Mr. Schofield took up the explanation. "You see, Mrs. Adams," he began, "while the Popkisses are eminently respected, they are just about as social as a snail in his shell. They live in that prison-like house on the corner, and although they have been residents of this town for over 20 years, I doubt if 10 people have seen the inside of their house. Certainly Gamaliel is the only chap who has ever had the nerve to call there. There are 3 in the family, the father, the mother, and a tall, spindling daughter. The latter is 6 feet, I should say, and is thin and angular, freckled and red-haired. I tell you, Gamaliel," turning to the young man, "you will have a corner on that market, and need fear no competition." "Well, I'm provoked with you," exclaimed his sister. "When I saw that evening suit, and heard that you really meant to mix with the world a little, I felt awfully pleased, and began to think you were going to give up your queer ways and become like other people after all. But here, it's the most preposterous thing you have done yet. Tell us about the call," she broke off, curiosity getting the better of her displeasure. "I think they were a little surprised to see me," admitted Gamaliel. "The house was very dark, and the servant was a dickens of a time coming to the door, and when at last I did get in, I couldn't think of anything to say. We all 4 sat staring at each other for a while, and then by way of variety, I suggested going down to the theatre." "Gamaliel Wetmore, you are certainly taking leave of your senses." "Did they accept?" asked Mrs. Schofield, nearly choking with suppressed laughter. "Mr. and Mrs. Popkiss did not, from which we gather that Miss Popkiss did," said Emma resignedly. "And have you seen anything further of the young lady?" "Not as much as I would like," answered Gamaliel cheerfully, "but a good average of 7 times a week. As I pass the house 4 times daily, it would be hard lines if at least one trip did not obtain me a glance of her. True, there would be no concealing that tall figure and red head, if it were anywhere within sight, observed Emma. But seriously, Gamaliel, have you seen anything more of her? Yes, I secured her an invitation to a drag party given by the Osborne Club, and then realizing that since I was probably the only man she knew, she would have a pretty stupid time if I wasn't there to introduce her, I attended as her escort. I'm also going to dance the cotillion with her tonight. Did you ever? Ejaculated Emma when Gamaliel had taken leave of us. This plain, spindling Popkiss girl is actually drawing Gamaliel into society without being in it herself. Yes, in spite of our derision, she has accomplished what we have essayed season after season in vain. Gamaliel has the kindest of hearts, even if he is queer, and out of compassion for her loneliness and neglect is doing the very thing he has persistently refused to do heretofore. I confess I am delighted, for once accustomed to it at all, he will take to it naturally, meet attractive girls, and forget all about his Wedge. I was not so sure of this, of Gamaliel's forgetting Miss Popkiss, I mean, and as the days wore on, I fancied detected signs of a deeper interest, and marvelled that Emma, who was generally so far-seeing, should be so unconcerned. Therefore I was scarcely surprised when, toward the close of my visit, she came to me in great annoyance, declaring she wished she had never heard the name of Popkiss. Emma was on the point of giving a luncheon for me, and she explained that Gamaliel had asked as a special favour that Miss Popkiss be invited, and that she had weakly acceded, believing the girl would send a regret because she had never called. But what should that great idiot of a brother of mine do? Concluded Emma tearfully, but explained to her that I had been too busy during your visit, but anticipated the pleasure later, and that in the meantime I hoped she would waive formality, etc., etc. In fact, I had no idea Gamaliel could be so suave. Isn't it odious? Stiff and ungainly and silent as she is, she will cast a damper on everything. I tried to be sympathetic, but in the secret depths of my heart I felt base satisfaction at the prospect of meeting this much talked of young lady. When, however, the hour of the luncheon actually arrived, a curious circumstance had driven Gamaliel's protégé quite out of mind. I had an uneasy consciousness that something had occurred to perturb our hostess, and as soon as I could manage a word aside with her, she whispered, "Do you see that exquisite creature over there by the window? I mean, the girl in the soft white mull and the big leghorn hat with the pink roses? Well, I have not the faintest idea who she is or why she is here." None but the blind could have failed to notice the young woman thus indicated, for she was not only charmingly dressed, but had a beautiful face as well, with a strong, sweet mouth that convinced one that she was beautiful all the way through. "Some mistake," I whispered back, "but I would keep her in ignorance of it, since she is evidently a lady. You can introduce me without mentioning her name, and being a stranger I can easily make laughing reference to the omission and later pronounce the name in your hearing." "That will help me out beautifully," was Emma's hurried reply. "Only don't waste any time, for if Miss Popkiss is not here in 10 minutes, I shan't wait any longer, and I must know the stranger's name before going to the table." As I approached the object of our solicitude, she rose to greet me, saying prettily that she had wanted to speak to me because she understood I came from Washington. "You are fond of Washington?" I asked. "It is my home," she answered simply, then added, "At least I call it so. We have lived chiefly in London for the last 10 years. "And how in the name of mysteries did you happen to come here?" I wanted to say, but what I did say was, Osborne must be a curious change from London. At length I made the plunge and flatly asked her name. "My name is Popkiss. Florence Popkiss," was the reply. I turned to our hostess. "Emma," I said with careful, distinct utterance, "Miss Popkiss tells me that she too is a native of Washington." Emma fairly gasped. "Impossible," she articulated. Before the luncheon was half over, I had quite lost my heart to Miss Popkiss, and she completed her conquest over the rest of the company when, on returning to the drawing-room, she sang us some of the freshest, sweetest English ballads we had ever heard. Emma and I did nothing but discuss the fair singer the rest of the afternoon. When Mr. Schofield and Gamaliel came home at night, we rushed upon the latter with a torrent of questions. "I simply can't wait another instant to have this mystery explained," cried Emma, buttonholing her brother. "Now, Gamaliel, who was this young woman I entertained at luncheon?" "Who were the young women, I should think you would put it," corrected Gamaliel. "Nonsense! You shall answer me. I want to know this instant whether your Miss Popkiss is the loveliest of girls or the plainest." "Bless you, how can I judge when I have seen so few?" "Come, Gamaliel," I put in. "This is really too bad. Did Emma's invitation miscarry, or did you all along intend to invite this pretty Miss Popkiss in place of the tall red-haired one?" "Oh, didn't I explain that Miss Popkiss is out of town?" asked Gamaliel innocently. "She is in Boston studying music, and has been for some time, as Emma would be aware if she took more interest in her neighbors. Miss Florence Popkiss is a cousin, and is visiting her aunt and uncle in their daughter's absence." We took a deep breath. "And did you understand all this when you called there that first night?" ventured Emma. Gamaliel surveyed us blandly. "Oh, no," he said. "I simply got tired of waiting for the corner drugstore to come down Lincoln Avenue, and thought their parlor would be a good place to rest." End of section 2.
Section 3 of The Black Cat, Volume 5, Number 5, February 1900. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Greg Giordano. The Black Cat, Volume 5, Number 5, February 1900. Section 3. E Pluribus Unum, by William S. Walkley. There was me bunkie, Dunham, the rookie, and God only knows why he ever went in. He was the littlest brown-haired, blue-eyed kid you ever saw, with laughing ways and dainty manners, but his place was with his ma, though no man ever put up a better scrap, as even Silver Anderson knows. He come to me tent, and he says, "I'm to live here," chucking down his kit. Billy McNutt rolls over and says, "Hope to die. What dairy calf are ye?" The cove must have busted his spurn string and run for it. "Where's your nurse, little un?" hollers Silver Anderson, the swine. He just grinned, sort of sheepish, and never said nothin', going red as an artillery blanket. I asked him what his name, and he hauls out a little silver-mounted business and pulls out a visitin' card, handing it to Billy McNutt. He orter seen us fellers open our winders and look at it. Billy gets up and bows and scrapes his feet, looking at the ticket. Then he says, Billy was a feller what would have shined in a theater. He says, sarcastic-like and grand, "Oh, glad to welcome you to the 5th Army Corps, Mr. E. Pluribus Unum, with your name parted in the middle," handing the ticket to me. The rookie just grinned some more, and we all laughed. Billy is such a funny little beast. Then he up and tells us his name is E. Purinton Dunham, and that the bellboy of our hotel, meaning Billy, ain't no lady. That riled McNutt, and he was for murder. Only I sat on him, he being best controlled by force. "Take it cool, William," says I. "It being so hot, and Billy's being so sweaty from being sat on," says Silver, always thinking of his thirst. "'Tis only right and proper Mr. E. Pluribus Unum should be escorted to canteen to buy for the christening." "Strong drink is ragin'," says the child, stringing the whole gang. "So's Billy," says Silver, "and when the elephant," which was me, "pulls his freight off'n 'em, 'tis either beer or a gun strap. You has your choice." The kid wasn't feezed a minute, but he says he was willin' to part with the price for a little of the sinews of war. He could simply talk 10-inch words and never a recoil. And that's the way we first knowed and baptized ye Pluribus. The cuss growed on us, spite of his milky way. Had a knack for soggerin', too, and could cook like a Chinaman. Guess he done it for his ma when she was sick. He was willin' and handy round camp, and worked like a nigger, drillin' and guard-mountin' until his feet was bleedin', but never a yip nor white feather. Dead game kid. Silver tried to get next to him and hog him out of his little wad, but me and Billy said 'twas no go, so the Silver had to stop rearing his thirst on salty stuff to spoil with the kid's money. Well, when we got down to Cubby, the push thought Pluribus would drop his tail and be a quitter. Nary a quit. It was like a bunch of nails, and the terrible heat, and the mud, and the rain, and digging trenches give most of us that sarsaparilla feeling, too. But Pluribus was up and comin' with a hoss to let. Billy McNutt softened up on the child and tried to do some of his work, 'cause Pluribus was gettin' thin, though he stayed with his feed, when they was any. I heard Billy arguin' with him. "Pluribus," says Billy, "give me your shovel, and you rest yourself like a nice boy." "Thanks, Billy," said the youngster, proud-like. "You ain't so many, and this is my detail. You've just come in, ain't you?" Billy laughed sort of soft, and said he guessed he could stand it better'n Pluribus could, and he made a pass for the shovel. But the kid was quick and wouldn't have it. "Damn it," says Billy, "you'll kill yourself in them hellish trenches, diggin' like an Italian in a sewer. Let's see your lunch books." The little bantam's hands were blistered like he'd been burned with a red-hot iron, and we never knowed it. "My God," says Billy, near weepin', and he took the shovel, and an extry stunt shovelin' trenches. Billy's heart's as big as old Shafter, is Billy's. The excitement kept him lively as weevily hardtack. The first dead man Pluribus saw, he turned white as a hospital cot and swallered hard, but he never let go. He wa'n't no coffee cooler, you bet. At San Juan he was a wonder. Me and Billy was prayin' the kid get the fever and be on sick call when the fight came off, but he wa'n't. Didn't sort of seem right for the cuss to be in it, neither. We was lyin' in the long grass, eatin' of our hearts, waitin' for the word to pay our respects to the little king soggers, and the bullets was singin', whistlin' and whistlin' like 100 fiddles playin' top notes in wicked spasms. McNutt was crawlin' in front of Pluribus, so's to be a bullet-proof for him, doin' it gradual so the kid wouldn't get on. Curious how Billy cottoned to the lad. Pluribus was on his back, staring up into the sky. 'Twas hotter and bluer than coolin' steel, and he laughed. "Billy," says he, "them bullets sound like a fly under a sheet of paper, mad and sassy." "Yup," says Billy, fingerin' his cut-off, "and they stings wusser'n a hornet. The fellers are dyin', too, potted like woodchucks." "Shut up," says the kid, thinkin'. "The band or them buzzards'll take care of 'em. You tend to your knittin'." He was a keener for fair, Pluribus, and Billy grinned at the sass of the rookie. Under fire, too. "Maybe it's funny, but I don't remember much about the fightin' after we got to work. 'Tain't right to keep men under a nasty fire, and sharpshooters a baggin' everything blue in sight, without showin' what the range practice has done for them. Men what lost their mess waitin' on their stomachs are sort of wasted, anyhow. They don't get a chanct to die with their blood up when they don't care if they does die. Kinda locoed, only they never forgets where the flag is. Bein' killed while you're reservin' fire for half a day is bad for the nerves." But finally they give us a go. 'Twas a tidy sprint, while it lasted. Billy and Pluribus close together, pumpin' lead at a sunburnt mud wall. There wasn't much yellin' till we were at the top, and the yaller rag was yanked down and Glory was floatin' over free Cubby. We yelled then, yes, and damn if the burnin' tears could help comin', just for the joy at seein' it there, and bein' alive to see it, that's what. There was some as got their everlastin' discharge, honorable. Some got a big go at servin' their country in hospitals gettin' well. Some made crutches out of crooked sticks and stayed away from the sawbones to fight for grub. And there wa'n't no sorrier when the bloody hidigos hung out a shirt on their back porch and quit the game. Now, in course of knocking round barracks for 20 year, in one regiment and another, I've seen some curious things. Chasing Indian devils over alkali plains, and in the Badlands, rounding up them fool strikers in Chicago, and making little maps of Alasky. Puts a man on sentry go over more'n a 10-acre lot, and interjuices curious folks. But Pluribus beat the whole outfit to a standstill. After Pico's Bill Shafter took a pacer down to the village and raised our flag over the palace, there was nothing to do but swap baccy and get the fever, which last me and Billy did. Not bad, but we didn't notice things for a day or two. Then we saw Pluribus was going. The hustle and rush and excitement had kept him up, and he sort of forgot he had a home and a mother. But it took him sudden, and that kid was dying because he couldn't get up and dust for his ma. Homesick, dying for his mother, just as certain as if he was mortal wounded. If Pluribus would only cry, says Billy, being a great lad for the women, it'd bring him right. Women does. But he sets there with his eyes big and shiny, like Mickey Hogan's woman, when they told her he had cashed in. God, it's wicked. Billy, says I, the kid'll never see his home again if he don't get there quick. What you giving me, says he. Struth, says I. Dying, says McNutt, scared and whispering like folks does in a room with a corpse. Yeah, sure thing. She's just a-fading out like snow before a Montana Chinook. By damn, says Billy. Then he throwed a sudden chill and turned his face to the tent wall, but I never seen him shake none. The QM department started us back to the States on a thorough packet from hell, and the old boy himself was at the helm. Down in the stifling hold they put us, with a few lights, dim and faint in the fog of fever breath, bunks in tears with the grinning ghost of what had been a sogger in every one. There was a whole graveyard, stirring at the last reveille. On deck it was as bad, or worse. How could fellers sleep with empty bellies and their blood on fire, and listening to men in the hospital shrieking and dying, every one in his own horrible way? No two men ever die alike. Some just quit breathing. Some prayed, some cursed, some just babbled with their folks, laughing and talking, patting hands on swaying baby talk. Crazy. It was all kind of off in our nuts. Asleep was nothing but a wide awake, knowing horror that the tremens couldn't touch, and more. The ship was a floating, God-forsaken insane asylum. Good God! Nights and days, days and nights, it comes back to me. And when it's my time to go over the big divide, it'll be with the shrieking, damn, and rave and cursing and crying of 1,000 devils, with yaller skins and coals of fire for eyes. 1,000 skeletons with rawhide faces, grinning out of lips blue as grapes, and with claws like birds of prey. Me and Billy crawled up and sat by Pluribus in the hospital, never saying a word. The kid never knowed us, and never wanted nothing. His mind was a blank to his surroundings, and he didn't seem to suffer much. Just was dopey, smiling to himself and talking to his ma in a quiet, happy way that made me and Billy creepy. Knowing it wasn't real, I pitied Billy while we was waiting. Poor little Pluribus had the easiest detail after all. One day the kid went out, surrendered unconditional. They stopped the ship, and it was whisked as the house of death, with the engine still. Billy had a small silk flag that some girl had given him at a station. Always trading buttons with the women was Billy, and he sewed it over the kid's chest. Chaplain said a prayer, I guess, but I never heard it. And there was a splash down below in the cool blue water. Then they started the engines again. Me and Billy never spoke. We couldn't for a long time, just standing, looking back over that trail of white foam in the blue water, that trail marked every mile with a dead, staring sentry in blue, and stretches from Santiago, round Cape Mazy up through the Bahami Channel, past Hatteras, right up the coast to Montauk here, a thin blue line of tearing fine men. but me and Billy are thinking most of a little cuss with a flag over his breast, down yonder in the sea. End of section 3.
Section 4 of The Black Cat, Volume 5, Number 5, February 1900. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Beeswaxcandle. The Black Cat, Volume 5, Number 5, February 1900. Section 4. A Gentleman of a Very Old School, by Thomas Brockett. Anita was ready to begin her daily task of grinding corn between two stones, in the good old-fashioned way that had been in vogue among the women of her country for unnumbered centuries. She had been uncommonly successful in trimming the arbour that morning, and it seemed to her while doing it that the flowers had never been quite so lovely, the leaves so green, or the songs of the birds so melodious. She felt that something was about to happen. The feeling continued even while she was scrubbing the stone steps leading up into the hut. Whatever that something was to be, it would prove pleasant, and would happen that very day. Well, she would go into the hut and commence her grinding. But she paused in the doorway to take another look at the arbour a few 100 feet away. How beautiful it was! How clean and nice the doorsteps were! Yes, something surely was about to happen. The hut was large and substantial, but still only a hut. It had been built upon the slope of a hillside facing the east, and it stood upon a rock that, apparently, had been quarried away to make a place for it. The rock was the floor of the hut, and the rear wall as well, and towered above it for 100 feet or so. There was but one window, and near it was Tío José's loom, where the good old man sat every day and plied his endless weaving upon a web begun by one of his ancestors many generations ago, and carried forward by the labour of the oldest male of the family in every generation since, and to be finished? Who could tell? Tío José was well stricken in years, and there was none to succeed him. Meanwhile, Anita was standing in the doorway looking down the hillside and feeling still that joyful prescience. She really ought to be grinding corn, but what was it? Could she believe her own eyes? Yes, there certainly was a traveller, slowly coming up the narrow pathway. What if it were he? The long-awaited. If it might only prove so. And now he is at the arbour. Can it be that he will enter? Yes, he does. And stretching himself at ease upon the stone seat, he removes his hat and fans himself. Anita stands gazing at the arbour and its occupant in a sort of ecstasy. Surely it is he. Even the flowers and the birds have recognized him and bidden him welcome. Well, the grinding of the corn will have to be deferred. Going into the old uncle at his loom, the young girl put her hand upon his arm and said, "He has come, Tío José, he has come." But José was carefully selecting a thread of the proper colour for his weaving, and merely said, until he had found it. Then he asked, "But who has come, Anita mia?" "He whose pathway is across the vermilion sea, he whose staff is long and bent, he who hath a cross upon his satchel woven, he for whose coming our fathers watched and waited, and we ourselves have hoped. He has come, Tío José, he has come." José's indifference vanished instantly. "And hast thou seen him, little niece? Where is he now?" "He resteth himself in the arbour after his journey." "Then haste thee, Anita. We must wait upon him there with gourd shell full of the sap of the maguey plant to cool his thirst, and see that thou hast the meal for pancakes ready." And the young woman and the old man began to bustle about in most unwonted haste. Meanwhile, Ernest Dayton an alumnus of Harvard, was resting in the arbor's shade. He almost regretted that he had undertaken this tour of Mexico on foot. And truly, it is hard work, this climbing of steep hills in hot weather, especially if the hills happen, as in this case, to be in the hot lands. He could see the hut above him, and thought it probable that it would afford him refreshment and lodging. But the shade of the arbour, the fragrance of the flowers, and the music of the birds were delicious. He would be in no hurry to enter a stuffy hut. So he stretched himself out upon the seat, and presently fell asleep. For 2 years after his graduation, Dayton had lingered in the lap of his alma mater, deeply interested in the study of comparative philology, with but one object in view. The language spoken upon the shores of the Bay of Biscay, known as the Basque, is said to stand solitary among the languages of the world, having no discoverable relationship to any of them. He was determined to find somewhere, if possible, a tongue or a dialect, ancient or modern, that could be classed as of the same family as the Basque. To that end, he devoted his life and energies for 2 tireless years in the college library, and one day he made a startling discovery. He found 2 little words, one Basque, the other Aztec, pronounced almost alike and meaning precisely the same thing. Each was a word of 2 syllables, and each contained the same letters, with the exception of 2 letters. Now, the substitution of 2 consonants for any other 2 consonants is the very simplest problem ever encountered by a comparative philologist. Has not a French wit defined comparative philology as the science which takes not the consonants into account and ignores the vowels? Was it not possible that the long-lost brother, or perhaps cousin, of the Basque could be found in the Aztec? This question opened up such an interesting and important field of inquiry that Dayton determined to occupy it himself, and, provided with letters to the dons of the Museo Nacional, departed forthwith for the city of Mexico. There he was cordially received, and there he spent 2 more absorbing years among a magnificent collection of relics, studying them to such good effect that he gained a speaking acquaintance with some of the ancient languages still spoken in Mexico. But by this time his enthusiasm for the Basque had so diminished, and his interest in the Aztecs so increased, that he determined to make a pedestrian tour of the country. Equipping himself as lightly as possible, he took a staff that happened to be crooked, put a few things into a satchel that happened to have a cross upon it, and started on his travels. And so this hot day in 1898 found him asleep in a wayside arbour long years ago constructed by the pious worshippers of Quetzalcoatl for the rest and recreation of their god in his journeying over from the Vermilion Sea to the Sea of Blue. He had slept perhaps half an hour when he was awakened by something sniffing and whining about him. A plaintive and curious whine it was, and Ernest, before he opened his eyes, knew that it came from one of those strange hairless dogs so much petted by everybody in Mexico. Raising himself on his elbow, he patted the dog and looked vaguely beyond him for an owner. What he saw brought him suddenly to an erect position, and involuntarily he rubbed his eyes. Coming toward him down the hill approached 2 figures in such extraordinary attire that, but for his fresh knowledge of the picture writing of the ancient Aztecs, he must have doubted the evidence of his senses. There could be no mistaking the beautiful divinity in advance. It was Chimalma herself, mother of the evening and the morning star, Quetzalcoatl, god of the Aztecs, dressed in every particular exactly as she was on that memorable day so many thousands of years ago, when the wonderful piece of winged onyx fell at her feet. She was hastening forward, carefully balancing in her hand a gourd shell. Ernest hoped it would prove to be full of refreshing Magai beer, and that he would not awaken till he had partaken of it. Behind Chimalma came, with slow and solemn steps, a veritable priest of Quetzalcoatl, bedecked with all the fantastic adornments with which the picture writers were wont to represent their favourite god, the planet known to us as Venus. Slowly and deliberately he came, walking like a god, as became a priest approaching his shrine, and gravely swinging a censer smoking with incense. The traveller now arose to his feet, and stood, leaning upon his staff, awaiting them. Anita approached, and kneeling offered him the gourd, really full of beer, while Tío José stopped, swung the censer, and chanted the prayer, "While the little birds are filling the fragrant groves with joyous melody, may the hearts of thy humble servants be filled with thanksgiving for thy return." Dayton recognized the prayer at once. He had but recently come across it, and while he was listening to it, the significance of the whole performance slowly dawned upon him. These pious people had mistaken him, a modern Connecticut Yankee, for the ancient Mexican god returned from his wanderings. What should he do about it? He thought it over as he sipped the Magai beverage. These simple folk were gravely in error, no doubt, but it would be cruelty to undeceive them too suddenly. The role of Quetzalcoatl seemed to be thrust upon him, for the time at least, and he would essay to play it. Who could tell what rare opportunities for obtaining the knowledge he was seeking might thus be gained? "I am come to receive an accounting from my servants," said he, solemnly, in the language just used by Tío José in his chanted prayer. "Is it ready for the rendering?" "If my lord will deign to enter his servant's dwelling place, he shall see how the service hath been performed," said Tío José, beginning to retrace his steps, and going up the hill backward, keeping his face toward Dayton, and swinging the censer before him. It was a laborious task for the old man, and the god, pro tem, taking pity upon his priest, turned him about, and extending a hand to each of the couple, led them to the hut, and entered with them. "Now, if my lord will be pleased to rest upon this seat for a while, his servant will soon complete the record," said Tío José. Going to the loom, he proceeded to weave with great rapidity. Fortunately, Dayton was familiar enough with the ancient pictographic art to understand what was being added to this wonderful web. In a surprisingly short time, there appeared a picture of the flowery arbour, with the sleeping traveller, the hairless dog, Anita, Tío José, the path up the hill, and lastly the hut, with Dayton in the doorway, all fairly recognizable. In the right-hand margin was the date of the year, and on the left the month and day, recorded in ancient Aztec fashion. Tío José, bowing to the ground before him, announced, "My lord, it is finished. Thy servant is ready for the accounting. From the unhappy day of thy departure to this of thy return, behold, the record is woven here. Will my lord be pleased to inspect it now?" "Nay, faithful and diligent servant, that shall wait until tomorrow. This day shall be devoted to rest." "Be it so, my lord. Wilt thou be pleased to enter thy temple? 'Tis cooler than the hut." And going to the rear, he pulled a bolt. The solid rock thereupon began slowly and ponderously to turn upon a pivot, disclosing an immense temple, quarried in the solid rock, and filled with every imaginable relic of the ancient Aztec race. "Behold, 'tis here, my lord. Thy servants, my fathers and myself, have kept it as best we could, and now I am ready to return it unto thee. My lord knoweth that his servants' days draw near to their end. For many years has it been foretold that the last of thy servants' race should live to see his lord's return, render an account of his stewardship, and die. My lord, thy servant is the last of his race, and thou hast returned. Tomorrow shall the accounting be." With that last sentence, Dayton put aside the faintest remaining scruple against accepting the godship thus almost forced upon him. The accounting certainly should begin tomorrow, but it should be proceeded with at leisure, with truly godlike deliberation. With such a collection of old Mexican documents, some picture-written, some graven on stone, and for an interpreter, a servant to whom it was all easy reading, what a fund of knowledge he would be able to open up to the world. He would write a book that should make him famous. Tío José's life must end with the accounting. His lord would see to it that his demise should not be hurried. But the next morning proved that Tío José was gifted with a force of gentle insistence that not even the god Quetzalcoatl was able to overcome. While the divinity yet slumbered, Tío José had woven into his web that on that day was the accounting begun and rendered, and surely the record must not be falsified. And my lord well knoweth that his servant's time is short, and that his strength is scanty. And lo, there are many things to be shown to my lord, and much to be explained. My lord will be pleased to enter upon the business now. And Ernest felt obliged to consent. This web, said Tío José, indicating the one then on the loom, was begun by thy servant's great-grandfather on the day of the last grand tying of the years. That was 98 years ago. The first of its inscriptions is that new sacred fire had just then been kindled. There is little of importance in its record. Our Father, the Sun, and the stars have followed their accustomed courses. We have tied our years at the proper time. Nothing unusual has happened until yesterday, when thy servant recorded my lord's return to his ancient temple. In ruins now, and desolate. But within the temple are records which to read will fill my lord with grief. Yet must he read them, that he may know of the ills that have overwhelmed his people. Causing the rock again to swing open, Tío José stepped aside for Dayton to enter, and then followed him into a vault-like structure within the temple, well filled with woven rolls. These, he said, as my lord knoweth, contain each the history of one grand tying of years, equal to 104 years each. And my lord may well pass them all, save 2. In this one is recorded the date on which began his mournful wanderings from the land that loved and worshipped him. Here may he read how sad were the people's hearts at parting from him, and hear the prophecy, now happily fulfilled, that he should one day return from the east and fill the land with joy at his presence. This next roll may pass. It is full of sorrowful forebodings and evil happenings, but it tells the story of a continuous gala day in comparison with this one, which we will unroll to the very end. The era which it chronicles began with turmoil, distrust, and treason to the gods, spreading from the gates of Tenochtitlan to the uttermost confines of the empire. With an emperor at the capital who heeded not the stars, vicious governors in the provinces, and famine everywhere, thy people were reduced to despair, when suddenly it was told that from over the eastern seas in strange vessels with many followers, my lord had come to the rescue. Joy was in every face, and gladness in every heart. But life hath no such woe as that when hope like this is turned to disappointment. Instead of my lord, a stranger came, with strange beasts, and dress, and language. He came to the city which Tenoch founded, not to relieve, but to enslave, not to uphold, but to cast down. He came to tell them that their religion was false, their fathers liars, their gods but devils. How valiantly and fruitlessly thy people fought, and how they were overcome, all this and more is woven here. My lord can see that his servants have been writing in stone upon those walls, also events as they occurred for almost 19,000 years, and yet the world from which the stranger came was less than 6,000 years ago created, and the counting is his own. Under penalty of death by fire, thy people were compelled to embrace the stranger's religion, and thy temples were deserted. But thy servants, my fathers, pretending to be peasants of the lowest order instead of a noble hierarchy and priests of thee, lived on here in pious fear. Their hut was made to conceal the portal of the temple all these years. In these niches they sleep, and I pray my lord to see it, that in the coming time his servant be placed beside them in the place prepared. And here is thine altar, where the sacred fire has always been kept burning, save only when it has been extinguished lawfully on the last day of the year, Chetoctli, to be rekindled on the first morning of Ome Akkat. Will my lord assist his servant to ascend the steps once more? And leaning upon the student's arm, the Aztec priest was presently standing upon the tall altar's topmost step, his gentle face beaming with joy. Thy servant is happier than his fathers ever were. They hope for the day of their Lord's return. I have lived to see it. But, oh, my lord, thy servant is weak, and fain would rest him here. And he seated himself upon the stone of sacrifice. Thy servant is faint. It hath been foretold that he should die upon thy altar and at thy feet. All things within this temple are my lord's. I pray him here to abide with my faithful niece. She hath strength to serve her lord, and knowledge deep for one of her years to explain all hidden meanings here. And now thy servant is weak, and becoming blind, my lord. Ernest caught him in his arms, and pillowed the dying head upon his shoulder. And when Anita came running at his involuntary call in Spanish, they laid the lifeless form upon the sacrificial stone, dressed in the priestly robes. After 3 days, embalmed according to the manner of his race, Tio José was laid in the niche beside his father's. His effigy, long since made ready against this day, was embedded in the wall, the opening securely closed and cemented, and Dayton chiselled the date upon the rock in ancient Aztec characters. Not long afterward, before the tall altar of the temple, Ernest and Anita plighted vows which the padre at the nearest village confirmed for a consideration, notwithstanding the heresy of the groom, and the young couple still live in the hut that hides the temple. The clatter of the loom has ceased forever. It may be that Ernest is invested with less of divinity in the eyes of his cell-worshipper than on the day she first beheld him, but her love has grown rather than diminished. He is doubly happy, for the book on which he is working will some day convince the world that searching for the cradle of the human race in the Orient is but delving among the mushrooms of yesterday. End of section 4.
Section 5 of The Black Cat, Volume 5, Number 5, February 1900. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by April 6090. The Black Cat, Volume 5, Number 5, February 1900, Section 5. A Charcoal Sketch by Julia Schayer. He was sitting on the curbed stone of a deserted street, as the coldest night of the season was coming on. A very small, very ragged, and very black little boy. And he was crying with strangling sobs and coughs into his jacket sleeve. Around the corner presently swaggered 3 bigger boys, of varying degrees of color and raggedness. The boy on the curb instantly dropped his arm from his face
and assumed a stolid stare. But they had already seen him and stopped with one accord. "Hey!" cried the biggest of the three mockingly. "Whose kid is dis?" The boy addressed appeared not to hear. The speaker came towards him, ostentatiously doubling his fists. "Say," he repeated, "whose kid is you?" The child looked around. His eyes were red. There were streaks. On his rusty black face where the salt tears had dried. But he too doubled his fists, sniffing defiantly. "I's my own self's little boy," he shouted in a surprisingly big voice. "Dat's who little boy I is." "Yer lies," retorted the other boy tauntingly. "You's Big Ann's kid. De cops has got her, and you's cryin'. Hey, fellers, watch de kid a-cryin'." The other boys promptly jeered, and as was expected of them. "Cryin' nothin'," the victim shouted, getting to his feet. "Yer lies yourself." More jeers. Then one of the boys made a remark concerning the small chap's mother. It was essentially true, but, all the same, the boy made a dash at the speaker, planted a kinky head in the pit of his stomach, and sent him sprawling. In a moment he was on his feet, and the fight began. The other two boys drew back with anticipative grins. The boy attacked was a third taller, but what his assailant lacked in size he made up in fire and fury, and his was a just cause. The bigger boy, grinning derisively, kept on the defensive, occasionally flooring his puny antagonist, by way of showing what he could do if he wanted to. The little fellow panted badly, but showed no intention of giving in. The thing was fast becoming monotonous, and no doubt the bigger boy would have settled matters very soon. Just then around the corner swaggered a still bigger boy. At his appearance hostilities were suspended. The newcomer was a truly striking object. Big, black, and burly, with the face of a cunning, good-natured brute. He wore a red sweater with a conspicuous striped collar, and a pair of golf trousers much too large for him. A sort of dirty bag over one ear suggested a cap of some kind, and green golf stockings and russet shoes, odd ones, clothed his lower extremities. This boy, his hands rammed deep in his pockets, his enormous lips puckered into an introspective whistle, stopped short, taking in the situation at a glance. Then, his eyes fixed on the bigger of the combatants, he slowly drew his hands from his pockets and with an engaging smile began turning back the sleeves of the sweater from a pair of redoubtable black fists. A thrill ran through the spectators. "It's Babe Hoxie," one said in awe-stricken tones. "He kin lam de stuffin' out er your wall your weights. Piper's got a job on hand, saw. But Piper did not wait. In an amazingly short time he and his friends got themselves out of sight. Only the small boy remained, panting and coughing, very much the worse for his righteous battle. His jacket was torn up the back, and his thin legs showed through the rents in his trousers like two black snakes. The babe looked down upon him as from superior heights. "What you fightin' about?" he demanded. "Nothin'." "Say, don't yer try ter monkey wid me," said the babe, with a fell look. "I say, what yer fightin' about?" The little boy squirmed, but another look settled him. "He say I was cryin'." "So you was cryin'," said the babe. "What else?" He done say somethin' 'bout my old lady," answered the boy sulkily. "And you was tryin' ter lick him for it? That's right, only yer didn't git on to it in de right way, son. When you's fightin' a boy bigger'n you, de onlyest way is ter soak him in de soft part of de stomach, see?" "I done butted him de fust thing," eagerly put in the boy. "I done laid him out flat, that's right. Arter dat, I couldn't reach him, his arm's too long." The babe smiled approvingly. "You's de right kind of a kid, you is. Some day I'll give yer a pint or two that'll help you along fine." The keen blast swept down the street. It had grown much darker. The little boy shivered. "Say, time kids was in bed," said the champion. "You go home." The little fellow said nothing. His eyes roamed drearily up and down the street. "Where you all live?" asked Hoxie. Again there was no response. The people in whose house Sammy had lodged had driven him into the street that morning, when the officers had taken away his mother. In street parlance, his old lady, screaming and resisting. But even Goat Alley has its social code, and Sammy was loath to own himself homeless. The babe eyed him askance a moment. Then, "You come along o' me," he said carelessly. He started off and the child followed, rocking on his bowed legs, coughing dismally. Once Hoxie stopped to light a cigarette and offered Sammy one, which he declined. "Makes my cough a heap worser," he explained, and for several blocks the boys went on in silence. Midway of 14th and 15th Streets on Pennsylvania Avenue, there is a narrow passage, known to the homeless wretches of the national capital as Heat Alley. Tall buildings shelter it on three sides from the winter winds, and this place of refuge is further tempered to the shorn lambs who frequent it by the warmth oozing from the basement of a famous old hotel, whose barred windows give upon the alley. These windows are often open, allowing the escape of superfluous heat, together with culinary odors, delicious and tantalizing, if not nourishing. On a cold night, Heat Alley, compared with the streets, is luxury. Many a shelterless being finds his way there, preferring it from pride and perhaps from still stronger personal reasons to the station or lodging house. The police of the city know of and wink at the practice, seldom entering the alley unless to look for someone who is particularly wanted. Into Heat Alley, as yet tenantless, owing to the early hour, Babe Hoxie led the way, going on nearly to the end. "Here he is," he said at last. "Dis yere is my private apartment at Willard's, see? And I'm gonna let you occupy it tonight. Just lay yourself up agin dat pipe sticking out, dat son. Dat's right. Now ain't dat a daisy? Smell de roast turkey? Hot stuff, hey?" "You bet," said Sammy gratefully, hugging the wall. "Say, you lay low. I'll be back arter a while wid de chambermaid to make de bed," said Babe, grinning. "So long, son." In half an hour he reappeared, as had promised, a bundle of discarded newspapers under one arm, and in his hand a paper containing 6 currant buns and a bottle of beer, which he proceeded to share with Sammy. Then, spreading a number of papers on the paving stones, he bade the boy turn in and covered him with the remainder, tucking them in deftly and far more tenderly than Sammy's mother had ever performed that office, certainly since his infancy. "Dar you is," said Hoxie finally, "snug as a bug in a rug. Now you go to sleep. I'll see you later. So long, son." Again he disappeared, and soon the child of the street slept soundly on his couch of stones. All night the stars marched in glittering procession across the blue highway, visible to the lodgers in Heat Alley. They were not many, for only the hardest pressed sought its hospitality on such a night. But as the hours passed, a few cowering forms slunk in and drew themselves into shivering heaps against the wall, collars pulled up, hats pulled down, silent and still, sleeping and dreaming God knows what dreams of wasted lives and blasted hopes. All night the little black waif slept soundly under his paper blankets, waking at daylight, stiff and sore, coughing frightfully and very hungry. The other lodgers had vanished. Hoxie had not returned, and after hanging about the mouth of the alley for some time, the boy wandered off to earn a nickel or two at the market house to appease the gnawing of the wolf encased in his almost fleshless little skeleton. Thus began a month of precarious and exciting existence, hunting food all day, sleeping mostly in what the babe had called his private room at Willard's, though now and then driven by snow and rain to accept the municipal hospitality so scorned at other times. Sometimes Hoxie would turn up and share the paper blankets with his protégé, And again, Sammy would not see him for days at a time, but the code of the street forbade questions. When one day the babe reappeared, his somber visage, curiously with strips of plaster, a gory tale of battle and victory on his tongue, Sammy's admiration for his champion rose to the point of reverence. When he got big, he meant to be just like him, and he fingered wistfully the leather strap buckled about his puny waist, which, as everyone knows, is a sure means of making the wearer mighty in battle. That is, everyone in Sammy's world knows it. Besides, there was a feeling akin to affection in the forlorn, childish heart for the young bully who had defended and protected him. He longed to help him fight his battles, and whenever he earned as much as a dime, half of it was hoarded up for Hoxie. But at the end of the month, Sammy's old lady, having served her time, was at liberty to resume her career and claim her maternal prerogatives, which she promptly did. As these consisted chiefly in seizing upon Sammy's earnings and cuffing him when they fell below a certain standard, it cannot be said that the boy's condition was much improved. But at least he slept under a roof and in something resembling a bed, and after all his mother had her softer moods, so the puny boy felt vaguely that even such a mother was better than no mother at all. Another month passed, then a crime of unusual atrocity sent a shudder through every class of society. The perpetrator, a noted black tough, had escaped arrest and vanished. A reward of $250 was offered for his capture. The question of his whereabouts was the topic of discussion in all circles, and scarcely a day elapsed without a new theory or clue. So some weeks passed. On a gusty March evening, Babe Hoxie was holding forth on the subject to an audience of young toughs on a street corner, when he saw a familiar figure hovering on the edge of the crowd. It was Sammy, wan and wasted, and evidently laboring under great excitement. As Hoxie's eyes met his, the boy nodded, beckoned, and darted into a nearby alley, whither Hoxie, getting rid of his gang, quickly followed. Sammy was waiting for him in the seclusion afforded by an ash barrel. Light from a window showed the boy's eyes rolling wildly, his frail figure quivering with agitation. "Say, babe," he began in a gracious whisper, "does you want to get the word they offer for the rest o' Pete White?" "Ah, what you're giving us!" exclaimed Hoxie, roughly shaking off the hand that clutched his arm. "Hush, man!" warned the boy. "For God's sake, don't holler like that. I tell yer I'm giving it to yer straight. Does yer want that $250 or not?" Hoxie's eyes bulged with eagerness, but a derisive smile parted his thick lips. The boy drew him down closer. "You can get that money all right, babe, for I know our Pete White is lying low." He stopped, choked by a cough that threatened to tear his little body asunder. Hoxie watched him impatiently, yet with a sort of pity on his brutish face, until it was over. "Now, den," he said, "if your kin talk, say dat again. How come you know where Pete White is? Say!" "My God, babe," gasped the boy, "he's staying with my mudder now, dis minute. Dey's settin' in de kitchen, eatin' and drinkin'. Truth, babe," he protested, as Hoxie exclaimed incredulously, "he's been to most a week. He's lived with us before. Many's de time. He beat me for nothing, and he's beat the old lady too. Many's de time." "Den why don't she get dem cops onto him, say?" queried Hoxie suspiciously. "She's skeered of him, that's why," whispered the boy fearfully. "He 'lows he'd kill her, and me too, for he would let himself be took, and he would too. He's a dangerous man, he is, and he orter be locked up. See, babe, you's been good to me when my mud was sent down, and I wants on you to get the money. 'Deed, babe, it's God's own truth I's tellin' yer," he insisted solemnly. "I's done had pneumonia, and dey thinks I's in bed upstairs. I got de winder and clung down de vines to find yer and put yer on it, see?" "Well, lad," said Hoxie, "if you ain't the blandest little nigger. Say, s'pose dey miss yer?" "Dey ain't gonna miss me," answered the boy stolidly. "Dey's too busy eatin' and cawin' on. 'Sides, I's goin' back now. Say, babe, you'll do it?" Hoxie stood silent a moment, then with a big oath broke out warmly. "You's de dingedest kid in dis whole town, Sammy. You is for sure. If I gets de money, you gets half. That's right, you gets half." "Who, me?" said the boy with an attempt at a smile. "What I do with all that money? 'Sides, dey suspicion me right away. No, indeedy, de plunks are yours. And say, babe, you better go to work now, for if anybody else catch on—" "Say," said Hoxie after a moment, "you know dey'll say nabbed your mommy too. Dey can't do nothin' to her, 'cause she can prove he threatened her life, see?" After a moment's further conference, Sammy scurried away to the purlieus of South Washington, while Hoxie, big with importance, made his first voluntary trip to a police station. An hour later, the house where the hunted murderer was said to be secreted was noiselessly surrounded by a strong posse of picked men. It was a squalid bar, standing by itself in a waste of ashes and rubbish. 2 men were stationed on each side, 2 at the rear and 2 in front, each with a revolver in hand. At first glance, the house seemed dark and silent, but close inspection revealed a gleam of light between board shutters, and the clinking of dishes and subdued voices were plainly audible. The men drew closer. One knocked on the door. The light vanished. Stealthy movements were heard. Then all was still. Another knock. A front window was opened, and a head enveloped in white cotton was cautiously projected. "What in de name of God y'all want dis time o' night?" quavered an injured voice. "Dey's sickness here, meester, and you's 'sturbin' de patient." "Come down and let us in," said the officer, "and be quick about it, if you don't want your door busted in." The head disappeared. "Look sharp," whispered one of the men at the rear. "There's a light in the back room. Watch out." "Are you coming or not?" called the man in front. This time the door was opened by a preternaturally old woman, who, at sight of the officer, began to whine dolorously. "What you all want of a po' hard-working old woman? And sickness in de house, too? Ain't a soul in dis house but me, and de sick child's mother. 'Deed, mister." 2 men, meantime, had entered and were exploring the miserable, squalid rooms. There was no one in the kitchen. In the upper back room, Ann Joram, a stout, handsome negress, known in police circles as Big Ann, was discovered, bowed in apparent abandon of grief over a child who lay in the bed. As the officers came in, the woman turned on them with a large, reproachful gesture. "Maybe 'tain't no sick child here," she said with maudlin dignity. "Maybe he's putting it all on, too. My Lord!" The officers stepped to the bedside. There was indeed no shamming there. The little black face on the pillow was drawn and ashy. The hollow eyes stared strangely at the officers. The child's labored breathing filled the room. For an instant the officers hesitated. Mrs. Joram profited by the occasion to throw herself across the bed with frantic lamentations. This movement displaced the counterpane, which hung to the floor. Instinctively one of the officers stooped and looked under the bed. Rising quickly, he blew his whistle, and the next instant a big black brute was struggling in the hands of the law. It took 4 strong men to secure him, but at last the noted Pete White was hand and foot in irons. For some moments he stood glaring and panting like a trapped beast, then suddenly lurched toward Big Ann, who, rigid with terror, still cowered by the head of the bed. "It's you all's doin's!" he shrieked, raising his arms above her head. "It's you all's fault!" The manacled wrists descended, but the woman started back with a cry of terror, and at the same instant the sick boy flung himself forward across his mother's breast. The irons fell full upon his head. He did not move again. The obsequies of Sammy Joram, the cost of which was borne by some person unknown to anyone but the undertaker and one other, eclipsed anything of the sort ever witnessed by even the oldest inhabitant of Goat Alley. A casket adorned with a wreath of unusual size, a hearse with nodding plumes, and 3 carriages, into one of which Mrs. Joram, alias Big Ann, swathed in black, was assisted by a colored pastor of note, were the salient features. In the carriage assigned to the pallbearers rode William Augustus, otherwise Babe, Hoxie conspicuously elegant as to linen and jewelry, and accompanied by 3 of his least disreputable friends, chosen by him for the occasion. "He was de gamest kid in dis town, fellers," was Hoxie's tribute, as the clods fell into the gaping grave. "And dat ain't no lie." End of section 5. End of The Black Cat, Volume 5, Number 5, February 1900.